In our previous lesson, we discussed the fundamentals of computers and how they are used in everyday life. Today, we will turn our attention to computer hardware. Have you ever wondered what the different parts of a computer are called and what they actually do? In this lesson, we will look at the physical components of a computer and discuss their functions. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to identify common hardware components and explaining why they are important. So, let's get started. Before we look at the definition, let me ask you a question. Have you ever used a keyboard? Of course you have. What about a mouse? What about a monitor? Or maybe a printer? Well, all these are examples of computer hardware. So, what exactly is computer hardware? Computer hardware refers to the physical parts of a computer that we can actually see and touch. For example, if I ask you to point to a keyboard, you can touch it. If I ask you to point to a monitor, you can see and touch it. The same applies to a mouse, a printer, and the system unit. In simple terms, if it is a physical component of a computer system, then it is considered hardware. Think about it this way. If I accidentally drop a keyboard on the floor, it might break because it is a physical object. That's hardware. As you can see on the slide, some common examples of computer hardware include the monitor, the keyboard, mouse, system unit, and printer. These components work together to help us enter data, process information, display result, and perform many other computer-related tasks. Now that we understand what a computer hardware is, let's look at some examples. Take a moment and look at the pictures on the screen. I have a simple question for you. How many of these devices have you used before? I'm sure most of you have used a keyboard, a mouse, or a monitor. Some of you may even have a printer at work or at home. These are all examples of computer hardware because they are physical devices that we can see and touch. Now, notice something interesting. Although all these devices are classified as hardware, they do not perform the same functions. For example, the keyboard is used to enter data into the computer, while the monitor displays information to the user. The CPU processes data, while storage devices such as hard disk and SSDs store information for future use. Even devices such as microphones, webcams, and routers are considered hardware because they are physical components that support communication and interaction with computer system. So, the next time you sit in front of a computer, remember that you are actually surrounded by many different hardware components working together. And here is a quick challenge for you. Can you identify 3 hardware devices around you right now? If you can, then you are already applying what we have learned in this lesson. Now that we have seen some examples of computer hardware, let's organize them into categories. Generally, computer hardware can be grouped into 4 main categories. The first category is input devices, which are used to enter data into a computer. The second category is output devices, which present information to users. A simple way to remember the difference is this. Think about what happens when you type a document. You use a keyboard to enter data into the computer. That's why a keyboard is called an input device. Similarly, when you move a mouse, scan a document, or speak through a microphone, you are providing data or instruction to the computer. These are all examples of input devices. On the other hand, after the computer processing the data, it needs a way to communicate the result back to you. That's where output devices come in. For example, a monitor displaying information on the screen. A printer produces a hard copy. Speakers produce sound, and a projector displays information to a larger audience. So, whenever you are unsure, ask yourself this simple question: is this device sending information into the computer? Or is it receiving information from the computer? If it's sending information into the computer, it's an input device. If it's receiving information from the computer, it's an output device. Simple, right? Now, let's talk about processing devices. Processing devices are responsible for processing data and instruction in a computer. The most important processing device is the central processing unit, CPU. The CPU is often called the brain of the computer because it processes data, executes instructions, and controls the overall operations of the computer. Think of it this way: when you type using a keyboard, click a mouse, open a document, or play a video, the CPU is working behind the scene to make all those activities happen. In fact, without the CPU, a computer would be like a car without an engine. It might look complete on the outside, but it would not be able to do anything. That's why the CPU is considered one of the most important components of a computer system. Its main functions include processing data, executing instructions, and controlling computer's operation. So, whenever you hear someone talking about computer speed or performance, the CPU is often a big part of that discussion. Let's talk about storage devices. Imagine working on assignment, saving it, and then opening it again tomorrow. How is the computer able to remember? The answer is storage devices. Storage devices are used to store data, information, and programs for current or future use. As you can see on the screen, there are different types of storage devices, including RAM, ROM, hard disk drives, USB flash drives, and memory card. Here's an important point to remember. Some storage devices, such as RAM, are used while the computer is actively working. Others, such as hard disk drives, SSDs, USB flash drives, and memory cards, are used to keep information for a longer period, even after the computer has been switched off. Think about your phone for a moment. The photos, videos, and documents you saved last year are still there because they are stored in storage device. Without storage devices, a computer would forget everything every time it was turned off. We have seen some examples of storage devices. Let's classify them into two main types: primary storage and secondary storage. Primary storage includes RAM and ROM. RAM is volatile memory, meaning its content are lost when the computer is switched off, while ROM is non-volatile memory, meaning its content remain even when the computer is switched off. These storage devices are directly accessed by the CPU and provide fast access to data during processing. Think of RAM as your working desk. When you are doing an assignment, you place the materials you are currently using on the desk so they are easy to reach. Secondary storage, on the other hand, includes devices such as hard disk drives, SSDs, USB flash drives, and memory cards. These devices are used for long-term storage and can hold large amounts of data. Think of secondary storage as a filing cabinet where you keep documents safely for future use. The good thing about secondary storage is that your data remains available even after the computer has been switched off. Before we end today's session, let's quick recap what we have learned. We started by understanding what computer hardware is: input devices, output devices, processing devices, and storage devices. In our next lesson, we will explore computer architecture. Until then, keep learning, keep growing. I'll see you in the next lesson.